Hey everyone, Dr. Daniel Ricciardi here. Today we are joined by an expert in weight loss and author of the book Fat Funeral, which is recently a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Daniel Dell'Uomo, welcome. Thanks for joining us. How you doing today?
Doing great, Dr. Dan. Thanks for having me.
Of course, thanks for joining us. So we'll kick it off here. Obviously, I gave a little intro on you. If you want to just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Great. So my name is Dan Dell'Uomo. I'm a machine learning engineer by trade, which machine learning is a branch of AI. But I have a science background and I studied biology in college and grad school and spent a couple of years doing genetics research. And there was a long time in my life where I was really focused on writing a weight loss book. I spent years doing research in a lot of different fields around weight loss and analyzing and collating a lot of the science there and writing and editing and re-editing this book. It's called Fat Funeral, The Scientific Approach to Weight Loss.
Fantastic. Excellent book. Obviously, congrats on the Amazon #1 bestseller.
Thank you.
So just to get into it a little bit, you've had your own personal story with weight loss, which you describe in the book. What habits do you think caused the weight gain? And then why did you decide to begin your weight loss when you did?
Sure. So, for most of my life, I was in pretty good shape. But there were a couple of years during college where I started putting on weight and it, crept up on me. And I kind of rationalized it for a while. Like I was lifting weights at the time and I was telling myself that it was mostly muscle, and it's easy to rationalize and lie to yourself, which is one of the reasons why you need objective feedback. And you get that with a scale and a tape measure. But back to my story. So, I realized I needed to make a change when I was around 45 pounds overweight, which, 45 pounds isn't extreme, but it also isn't nothing. It's a good amount of weight, 45 pounds. And it was definitely enough to make a difference. And, it did. And it helped me understand what it's like to be overweight and how it happens and how easily it can happen. And especially because I was thin for most of my life, I really felt that weight gain. And I mentioned objective feedback, and the objective feedback that I ended up getting was actually from two really good friends of mine, one of whom it was 4th of July weekend, 2009, and we were all together and just, typical guys who have been friends a while, just kind of ripping on each other, kind of insensitively. But they were ripping on me for being fat the whole weekend, and they helped me realize that I had gotten really overweight because I hadn't really accepted it. I was kind of delusional. And in the U.S., we live in a really permissive society. Everyone's kind of afraid to hurt everyone's feelings, and most people aren't going to tell you that you've gained weight. And it's actually not like that everywhere in the world. In certain Asian countries, people will publicly shame you for being overweight. Certain Eastern European countries too, and I've seen that firsthand. But anyways, around that was 4th of July weekend. After that weekend, I kind of realized that I needed to lose weight, and I became really determined to lose the weight quickly. And I lost it very quickly in about a month or two, and more or less kind of never looked back from there. I've fluctuated a bit. But I've never approached my maximum weight from before, and that was 12 years ago now. And you asked what habits kind of led to my weight gain, and that's an interesting question. I think in particular it was Blue Powerade. Blue Powerade. I drank at lunch during these college years every day, and I think that really started the whole cascade. And my book is structured around 5 habits to develop. And habit number 1 is cut out all sugary drinks. Drinking sugar in any form, whether it's juice, soda, sports drinks, energy drinks, the science shows us that these are uniquely fattening, even worse than junk food. There's nothing you could do that is more fattening than drinking sugary drinks. And if you do, there's nothing more powerful you could do than cutting them out. And you can continue eating junk food regularly even, but if you just cut out sugary drinks and switch to water or even 0-calorie artificially sweetened drinks, you could see a huge difference. And I did. I mean, and that's a massive kind of killer app type low hanging fruit that a lot of people could do to make a big difference. I also, so I drank sugary drinks. I also ate a lot of white pasta type foods and a lot of bread. And I also probably consumed more oil than I thought, which the vast majority of people do, more added oil. But specifically, yeah, it was blue Powerade that most sticks out to me that is a habit that led to my weight gain. Nothing against Powerade. You can get 0 calorie blue Powerade now, which occasionally I have.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Isn't that crazy though? Especially if you think about Powerade, most commercials you'll see it'll be like a pro athlete, you know what I mean, having a Powerade or two to fuel their like epic performance.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but maybe not be the drink of choice if you're sitting having lunch at your desk.
Yeah, for sure. And a large part of the book is about marketing. And I know what you mean. I played sports growing up, and Powerade and Gatorade were always portrayed as these like healthy athlete fuel type things. So that was one big blind spot that I had, that I thought that this stuff was okay, but it really isn't.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that. So we'll turn, I guess, to your book now. Obviously, you've had your own experience that you shared with weight loss. There's weight loss is a super polarizing topic. There's a ton of content and books on weight loss.
It is.
Why did you decide and feel compelled to write Fat Funeral?
Good question. So, obviously my personal experience was a large part of it. And unless you've gone through, unless you've lost a lot of weight personally, I don't think that you should be the one giving other people weight loss advice. And the second reason is that I thought that it wasn't so much that I thought that I would be so good at this in particular. Although I am a writer. I used to write professionally, and I enjoy writing a lot, and I wanted to write something substantial. But the real reason that I decided to write a weight loss book was because I was so disappointed by the quality of the weight loss books and the weight loss advice that was out there. So this was a year or two after I lost weight. So around 2011, 2012, I was in grad school for biology at the time, doing cancer genetics research, and I came across a list of weight loss tips that was featured on Yahoo or something. I was on lunch break at the lab one day, and I read, just out of curiosity and boredom, I read the list of weight loss tips that Yahoo was offering. And I remember just being appalled. The list had been kind of just thrown together with no real thought or care. The tips were not in any particular order. And I think there was like a critically important tip, something like, oh, exercise regularly. And then but then the next one was like, take this obscure supplement. And I was like, what? And then, there was another nonsense tip about eating like low fat foods, like that misconception from the 90s. And, they didn't present any evidence for any of these tips. And having gone through this myself, I knew how ineffective this advice really was. And this was on the front page of Yahoo. Millions of people were seeing this. So then I started to I thought maybe this is just an exception. So then I started looking at the weight loss books that were out there at the time and the other advice that was being given on, blogs and wherever. And I read about 40 weight loss books and countless articles and websites. And I became really obsessed with this. But I realized that this, that lousy Yahoo list of weight loss tips was actually the norm, not the exception. Something serious was missing from the weight loss industry. More effort was going into marketing and recipes than, careful analysis of the science. More focus was placed on these arbitrary short-term programs than on like really understanding food and building effective habits. And there was a lot of bias. And quite frankly, I don't think that most authors of weight loss books try very hard. They just seem to, throw some words on a page. They write really loosely. They don't offer much evidence in support of what they're saying. The book seems to be mostly like a marketing tool for some program that they concocted. And And I think people really deserve better than that. You know, you're telling well-meaning people how to change their lives. You should offer hard evidence about what you're saying. And not a whole lot has changed since then. You know, not a lot of rigorous scientific arguments are made oftentimes when you see people giving advice. And you know, weight loss is a serious thing. You know, being really overweight is a serious problem. And I don't think that, you know, weight loss advice has gotten the effort that it really deserved. And I can't guarantee that, you know, you'll love my book. That's a matter of taste, you know, but I can guarantee that I don't think anyone's ever worked harder at writing a weight loss book than I did. You know, I'd bet my life on that. There are 1,500 citations to peer-reviewed scientific studies in there, most of which are meta-analyses, which are studies of studies, because you can find a study to support like almost any odd point that you want to make in nutrition. And a lot of like so-called like scientific arguments are basically just people cherry picking studies to support beliefs they already had. And I wanted to avoid that. So I focused on these things called meta-analyses, which, you know, you can't find a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials to support any odd point that you want to make. So I really made an effort, like instead of just finding studies to support what I already believed, I structured my beliefs around what these hundreds of meta-analyses in nutrition and surrounding fields were kind of saying. And I found some of the things that I thought or I believed weren't true. And I kind of changed my beliefs based on that evidence. And I wrote really carefully, and I took the time to, you know, research every sentence and every little point that I made. But that sounds kind of boring, right? Like 1,500 studies. You know, I also put a lot of effort into making it fun to read, or like readable, or at least as fun as something like that can be. I spent a lot of time editing like the flow and the sentence structure and stuff like that, and trying to add a bit of humor. And the studies are referenced with citations in the upper right-hand corner. So you can see, if you want to, you can see in the back of the book, like what the information in the sentence is based on. But I don't go into detail on most of the studies so as not to bore people. You know, do you really care what the scientists' names were, for example? But it allows you to cover a lot of ground without getting kind of bogged down. But ultimately, you know, this book was a response to that crappy Yahoo list. The book is organized around a short list of the most important weight loss habits that a person can develop, carefully ranked in order of importance. I call it the 5 golden weight loss habits. So yeah, that's what kind of led me to write it and some of the driving forces behind it.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, a couple takeaways just listening to you talk. Like you said, anybody can take 1 or 2 or 3 studies. If you have an idea, just find something that supports it and then say, quote, in studies. But if you're talking about that many studies, you can't really fake that. And then 2, it sounds like you didn't even know for sure what you were going to write when you started. It was more so through research you're learning, and you didn't even, sounds like you changed a few things you were going to write just because you didn't want to obscure the data from what the data was saying.
Yeah, the book really changed as time went on. I deleted whole chapters and even sections and rewrote it a lot. And the idea has definitely changed over time as more, you know, as I understood the science better. And it's impossible not to be biased. Like I'm biased, like everyone's biased, but I made as much of an effort as I could to really try to step back and examine myself and like where I was biased. But you can't escape it. You know, there's no such thing as being, you know, purely objective, but that's what I tried to be.
Yeah, we appreciate that. I will plug in too, there was some humor sprinkled in good areas, so it did add to the enjoyment of the book.
Good.
So,
yeah, I try not to be too boring, because I know, you know, science can be kind of a dry topic sometimes, and I wanted to appeal to the average person. So it is very scientific, but it's not written to be boring. Or I mean, at least that's what I tried to. I don't know if I succeeded with that, but I tried not to be boring.
For sure, much appreciated. So you mentioned in your book there's food groups that you gave a very clever name, the Fat Four. So what are these fat for, and why is avoiding them so critical to losing weight?
The fat four. So, most of the book is focused on food because that's the most important aspect of weight loss. And the all important line in food is processed food and whole food, right? But everyone kind of knows that, but there aren't really good definitions for, and we'll get to this in a bit, for what processed food actually is. What makes it fattening? And I thought about this really, really long and really hard. And I read thousands of ingredients lists of foods, like all the popular foods that people eat. Um, and, people are very different. And sometimes people give like blanket advice that might apply to some people or a lot of people, but not everyone. But I identified these four ingredients that really comprise processed food, like what processed food actually is. And there's only four. And if a food doesn't have one of these ingredients, it's probably fine. And these foods are why processed food is so bad, and ultimately why we have an epidemic of overweight and obesity. So the fat four are added sugar, added oil, white flour, and processed meat. Um, some people make statements like, "Oh, you should avoid carbs," or "You should avoid, milk," or something like that, which really just doesn't apply to a lot of people. But for the fat four, I really think that everyone on Earth would be better off without eating these foods. So much so that if a food doesn't have one of those four ingredients, it's probably healthy. And of course, there are exceptions to every rule. But in terms of giving a practical list of foods to avoid, I think the fat four are very good, and it's easy to remember, and it opens up people's eyes. Most people know about sugar and flour, but people are still mostly blind to added oil. A lot of people, they don't really understand how common it is. It's actually just as common as added sugar, and probably just as fattening, if not even possibly more so. So yeah, a lot of the book is spent discussing the fat four: added sugar, added oil, white flour, and processed meat.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Those things seem ubiquitous in pretty much most of the stuff you're finding in the grocery store now too. So this kind of leads into the next question I have for you. You discuss these one ingredient foods in your book a lot as being incredibly important, not only for weight loss, but also for preventing chronic disease. Why are these one ingredient foods so effective at doing both?
Great question. So quite simply, it's because one ingredient foods are the foods that we're evolved to eat. We evolved to eat foods with only one ingredient over all the evolutionary millennia. We didn't evolve eating processed foods with a lot of different ingredients. We evolved eating whole foods. And almost every food with one ingredient is a whole food. There aren't really any practical exceptions to that. And I'm talking about foods that you buy at the supermarket. Like if you buy a food at the supermarket and you turn it over and you look at that ingredients list, that's what I'm talking about here. Things like a jar of sugar or a carton of vegetable oil, like technically have one ingredient, but people don't eat those things. At least most people don't. So, and the reason that foods with more than one ingredient are so bad is what we were talking about before, the fat four: added sugar, added oil, white flour, and processed meat. If you look at a food and it has more than one ingredient, probably like 98% of the time, it's going to have one of the fat four. It's going to have added sugar. It's going to have added oil. It's going to have white flour, which goes by enriched bleached flour or synonyms like that. And the reason that it has that food is because, or it has those ingredients, is that food manufacturers add those in so that the food tastes better, so people buy more of it. But those ingredients, added sugar, added oil, and white flour are bereft in nutrients. Like they don't have. White flour has some nutrients, a lot less than whole wheat flour, but added sugar and added oil basically have no nutrients at all. So that when you're eating those foods, you're robbing your body of the nutrients that it was designed to have. And those foods also, make you eat more total calories because they're not as filling. They're not as satiating. So you want to eat more, you eat more calories of those foods and you gain weight. So hence the focus on one ingredient foods.
Fascinating. Yeah, so they're both lacking nutrients and they're providing more calories than you normally eat because they're not as filling. That's kind of
Exactly.
doubly bad.
Yeah, they lead you to eat more calories because they're not as inherently filling. So that, since you're going to pretty much eat until you're somewhat full most of the time, if you're eating those foods, you're going to be eating more total calories. And that's what leads to weight gain, of course, is eating more calories.
Gotcha. And vice versa, the one ingredient foods in general are generally more filling.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to be hungry to lose weight. If you're eating foods that are more filling, you can eat until you're full and lose weight because, you don't have those processed foods that are driving you to eat more total calories. So it doesn't have to be a painful process to lose a lot of weight. You really just need to focus on whole foods, and the whole foods can taste good, like eggs, a lot of types of meat, cheese, these are whole foods. And cheese is like one of the few exceptions. Usually it has more than one ingredient, but they're just like, cultures or maybe a little bit of salt. They don't have, cheese tends to not have added oil, added sugar, or any sort of bad things in it most of the time. But these foods can be, tasty, and you can lose weight eating them and feel good. Fruit, nuts, anything with one ingredient, potatoes, a lot of foods that people told us were bad for a long time, like certain types of meat and although processed meat is a problem. Like a lot of people give something like bacon a pass, like the low carb movement. But the science does show us that foods, processed meats like bacon or hot dogs, are actually associated with some really bad health outcomes, probably more so than any other food. And that's because they're low in protein compared to whole food meats like bologna or hot dogs or bacon has a lot less protein than, say, like chicken or a steak. And they're very heavily salted, like they're salted to the max. And those two things, there's also some issues with nitrites, make processed meat another thing that you should probably avoid. But as long as it's not a steak, chicken, fish, these are really healthy foods, and being high in protein, they help people lose weight.
Definitely. Yeah. I love, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention protein is really important because of that satiety thing we were talking about. Protein makes you feel more full on fewer calories. So adding these high protein, type foods can really help people lose weight.
That's good advice on the protein. And yeah, I just love the simplicity of that, not overthinking it and just doing the one ingredient foods to focus on also. Thank you.
Because thank you. It's complicated because food manufacturers and food companies are really good at understanding consumer psychology, and they're very good at marketing foods to us. It's if you let yourself be misled by food, by packaging, they will lead you to be overweight. And that's what most people, that's what's happened. So you really have to have some heuristic yourself to evaluate a food. And that's why I think the one ingredient heuristic, an evaluation tool is such a powerful thing for a lot of people.
So you're suggesting the food manufacturers may not have our best health in mind when developing their foods.
Dan, I know it's hard to believe, but our health is not always their top priority. I know this is shocking, but actually making profits is sometimes even a higher priority than our health, which I know that's going to come as a shock to a lot of people.
Heard it here from Dr. Dell'Uomo. So we've touched a good amount on food so far. Obviously, you can't talk about weight loss without at least discussing exercise. And obviously, there's a lot of debate on what is the best to do. In your research, in terms of exercise, what have you found to be the best habits?
Well, exercise and weight loss is a complicated topic. If you look at the science and you try to be as objective as possible, you can only really come to the conclusion that exercise by itself is not a terribly effective weight loss approach. So how do we interpret that? Well, the way that I interpreted it is that exercise is helpful for weight loss, but diet comes first. And diet is much more important for weight loss than exercise. And since it's much more important, it acts as a confounding variable, and that's something that obscures the effect in a lot of the studies that have been done on exercise and weight loss, because if your diet isn't good, you need to fix that first, not exercise. The science shows us, though, that exercise is maybe the best indicator of weight maintenance, which means that after you've lost weight, the science shows us that regular exercise is the best indication of whether you're going to keep that weight off. So therefore, you really have to exercise, because you're not trying to just lose weight temporarily, right? Like most people are, when they're trying to lose weight, they're trying to keep it off for good. But so exercise might not be critically important by itself in helping you lose weight, but it's critical for weight maintenance, and combined with an effective diet, combined with eating whole foods, is the best approach you can take. But, honestly, beyond that, I think asking about the link between exercise and weight loss is almost the wrong question, because exercise is bigger than weight loss. There's a chapter in the book called Miracle, where I discuss not all the documented health benefits of exercise, and they're actually just staggering. It's like adding exercise to your life is kind of like the equivalent of a real miracle drug, if that existed. The science just shows us really broad and massive health benefits, and that goes for several types of exercise. That goes for cardio, that goes for weights and resistance training, that goes for HIIT. It's all great, and they've all been shown to be extremely beneficial for your health and well-being and mental function, and just everything. So much so that you need exercise not just to keep weight off, but to really be the best version of yourself. So that's the way that I think people should approach exercise, not as like something that you're going to do in the short term to lose some weight. It's a lot bigger than that. And even if it's, the 5 golden weight loss habits, the exercise habit is number 3, and it's exercise regularly, in parentheses, at least walk regularly, because a lot of people don't want to go to the gym and do all that. But if you can at least walk, you actually get most of the health benefits of exercise. Not all of them, but just adding walking, regular, multiple times a week, long walks can be a huge game changer. So at least do that. But you need to do something, because exercise is just supremely important to health and well-being.
Yeah.
And evolution, sorry. I was just going to say that it all ties back to evolution. Evolutionarily, we evolved getting a lot of physical activity. Even when we evolved into farmers actually moved around more than hunter-gatherers do, based on step studies that they've done in the Amish. Farming was a very physically demanding activity. So throughout our whole evolutionary past, as hunters and gatherers, and then as farmers, we were always moving around. Obviously, hunters and gatherers move around a lot to hunt and gather food, and farmers move around a lot to tend their crops and livestock. But up until, the last few hundred years, we evolved getting a lot of physical activity. And of course, we don't need to today, and so many people are sedentary. So eating well and exercising makes an enormous difference.
Yeah, I think you touched on an excellent point there. I think when exercise is generally thought of, a lot of people think that you have to be out of breath, where you're to the point laying on the ground, dead tired. But if you're just walking, you could be even talking and comfortably breathing. You're still getting massive benefits. And obviously, like, there may be some instances where people would not be able to, but for the majority of people, that sounds like it would be dramatically helpful.
Oh yeah. I mean, what I like to do is I like to go for long walks and listen to podcasts. So it doesn't have to be painful. And, just adding that to your life can just be a huge game changer. You'll feel a lot better, and you'll start to, look a lot better too.
Yeah, great point. Even multitasking. So it's not even, you might be fixing it in with something you needed to do anyway. So it wouldn't even be taking any extra time even.
Yeah, I'm trying to get in the habit of just cleaning my apartment, something like that. Anything that you're on your feet, trying to get in the habit of doing that on a regular basis and getting a lot more organized. Anything that you're on your feet and being active, just cleaning your place up, stuff like, it can be anything, but just being on your feet and moving around makes a huge difference. And I'm talking about someone that's completely sedentary, which a lot of people are. So, any type of activity where you're on your feet and moving around is a massive game changer.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll change gears a little bit. So let me ask you this. Say you're somebody that wants to lose weight, and maybe you live in a household though where making decisions in terms of diet or exercise types things would be, I guess, the unusual, that you'd be unusual to do that in the household, or they would consider you weird. How would you, like, what advice would you give to somebody that was in that position and interested in trying to lose weight?
I guess I would tell them to set a good example. Change your own habits first, and other people will notice the success that you're having, and they'll probably be motivated to change themselves. And what you mentioned, thinking that it's weird or something to try to focus on your health, that's a toxic attitude. Trying to be healthy and making an effort should never be belittled or looked down upon, and you really shouldn't have any respect for those sorts of attitudes, because they are toxic. And if you're part of a toxic home culture like that, I think the best thing to do is just be honest with people. Tell them that your health is important to you, that their health should be important to them, and that you're going to start making changes. And you'll be doing them a big favor by doing that. And if they don't want to change, then that's their problem. I guess I've gotten lucky. My family and friends are pretty on board with like the health and fitness thing. So I'm not super familiar with attitudes like that. But I do know that it's tough to live with other people, because a lot of times you eat meals together. And right now I'm living alone, so I can kind of be like my own island and make really healthy choices. But I know what it's like to, be eating pizza with people, and it can be, it can be challenging to live in a house with other people. But the best thing you can do is to set an example, and try to do the best that you can, not just for yourself, but also for them. People have an effect on each other, and when they see your attitudes and your behaviors changing, they'll be motivated, and they'll also end up changing. So, but I know it can be challenging.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like what you said there though, especially if you're choosing to do it, you can kind of catalyze maybe change for your family too, and then you're impacting more people or whomever you're around or live with. Thank you.
Exactly. They show that, science shows that that's, and I don't like when people say studies suggest or science shows, but in my book you can see all the citations for this. But studies do show that attitudes are somewhat, attitudes and even like weight is kind of viral. So if you live in an environment where people are either really overweight or really fit, that's going to affect you, because we're social creatures ultimately. So, there's definitely an effect of that.
Yeah, thank you. Um, so what would if you had to give like a 1 to 2 minute motivational speech to somebody that wanted to lose weight, thinking about it, what would you say to them?
Well, ultimately, I know this might not be the best motivational speech, but you have to motivate yourself. And I know that it's hard. A lot of times having the right knowledge isn't enough. I've learned that in my own life. You have to follow it, and it's not always easy. But a lot of people, I would say, the vast majority of people don't really know the right approach to lose weight. They think they do. They'll just say like, oh, it's diet and exercise. But they really don't understand food and nutrition on a deep level. And a lot of times they are motivated, but since they don't know the right approach, which is to change your habits, and specifically habits around food and sugary drinks, a lot of people who are motivated are led astray by the food industry into thinking that their diet is healthier than it really is. Eating foods that are marketed to them as being healthy, but are actually just processed junk foods like Cliff Bars, or a lot of these like on-the-go yogurts with a ton of added sugar, or like the Go Lean Crunch breakfast cereal, which actually has more sugar than Lucky Charms per unit volume. And not really understanding foods and nutrition. A lot of the science in food has shifted a lot in recent years, and it's hard to keep track of. It shifted pretty dramatically. And such as, like the whole low fat and the low carb thing that's big now, which is actually, although low carb diets are successful, they're ultimately just as misguided as low fat diets. and they work because all junk foods have carbs, but that doesn't make whole food carbs, like fruit, for example, fattening. So a lot of this is understanding food and the science of food. So my advice is read my book, and then you'll know the right approach to take. And then you have to motivate yourself. And life is short. It's ending 1 second at a time. Being unhappy with your body is not a good way to go through life. And it's not a healthy way to go through life. And it's not how we're designed to live. And changing your habits, especially your eating habits, can fix that. The power is real. Compounding effects of habit change over time can be staggering. So read Fat Funeral.
Yeah, I love that. I could tell how important this is to you just from the tone of your voice. So I appreciate you sharing that. And as you said, Fat Funeral here. Before we go, Dan, where can we get your book? I know it's on Amazon. Where can we get your book, and how can people contact you if they have questions or they want to get in touch?
So yeah, the book's available on Amazon. It's in a few bookstores, but Amazon's the easiest place to get it for sure. There's a Kindle, there's a paperback, and now there's an audiobook. So just search for Fat Funeral on Amazon, the scientific approach to weight loss, but just Fat Funeral and it'll come up. I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram account with the handle fatfuneral.book. And you can reach me on Facebook or Instagram, and I do respond to most messages.
Fantastic. I'll also include those links for the Facebook and Instagram in my post as well for this media, so you can also find it on my page as well.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I've learned a lot today, and I've already read the book. So yeah, read Fat Funeral if you're trying to lose weight.
It was great. It was great being here. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. Take care, brother.
Bye.